Today we are discussing chess combo moves. The plan is to look at a couple whiteboard examples and then look at some actual games that were played. First thing you're looking to do is trade material or win material, potentially win the game, of course. Now, if you look at this board right here, we're playing as white. If you'll notice, we have a rook on e1 right there. It is very limited in moves. Now, one of the key things to combo moves is that your pieces need to be protected. So this queen right here is protecting the rook on e1, that queen right there. Okay, so in order to do a combo move, sometimes it involves, disguising. So you could have like a piece in front. So in this case, we have a bishop in front of the rook right here. So basically, we can move the bishop wherever we want, and it's going to expose what black's queen. Looking at e7 queen right there. So we take the bishop and we move it to take a7. Okay. Now when you look at black's queen is pinned to the king. Black's queen really only has one real option here, and that is to capture check, to which we respond with our queen, capture check. And now black has to decide. Black can't attack the white's piece on a7 because it either has to move the king with two spots or, put a defender in front or another defender, So black's in a bad spot. So this move wins us material and it improves our position. Plus, in addition to that, we still will probably have control of the bishop after the move is over. In this example right here, we are playing as white, and we're going to show some combinations that can be used with discovered moves. In this case, it's going to be bishop, knight, but this can also be done with knight and rook, knight and queen, depending on what's behind. Basically, what we have is a knight in front of a piece we'd like to move. This knight right here is in front of the bishop. The bishop is eyeballing the f6 queen. So we need to move the knight in a place that the queen can't go to recapture it. Okay? So if we move it here, that's not good. Black can get out of the way. If we say go to g6, threatening the rook, well, black's queen can recapture and get out of the way again, too. So the theme is black's queen's going to get out of the way. We have to find a good spot to go. If we take this knight right here, well, guess what? It's right in black's queen's view, so we're not winning material. So that really leaves the only good choice right here, which would be knight takes d7. Knight takes d7 puts black in a tough spot. I mean, black could capture the bishop right there. That's a bad trade-off. Black needs to get out of the way to be safe, and then we can take the knight and put it back. And now we have two defenders and only one attacker, where we had before we had three attackers and only two defenders. So the other option, of course, for black is to capture right here with the bishop. But now we can play bishop takes queen, and then black is in a tough spot. They either capture the bishop or they move their bishop out of the way. So black's not in a good spot here. Black could take, So basically, we're looking for combo moves that put our opponents in a bad spot. Now let's take a look at some actual games I played and take a look at some more examples of that. Okay, here's the first example of a game I played on the Dr. Chess mobile phone app. Playing as white. Got a number of options. We're looking at the queen. We're looking to do a check combo. So I decided to go in and take that pawn right there. To which black decides they want to kind of trap me. So they take the knight on d7 and move it to c5, basically looking to trade off or entrap me here. Now there's a number of options we have. as white. What we want to do is we're looking for a check combo that can win some material. If you look more closely at this position, you'll notice that there is an A8 rook that is unguarded. Okay? One way we could win that piece is by putting the king in check. So we're going to go basically move to C6 check, and then, you know, I was expecting black to maybe block with a queen, and then we take right there, and then trade off queens. The actual move ended up being check right there, and then black decided to block with a knight, to which I played queen takes, A8 check. Black looks to trade off queens again, to which I played queen takes, and then was able to get the queen out, and a few moves later, winning material, and that was just enough to help win this game here. In this game right here, we are playing as black, and we want to move white's c4 queen out of the way. So we take the knight on c6. We move it to e5, which forces white's queen to move. There's a number of options. Not all of them are good. White decides to go to c3. Now, if you'll notice, we have a rook that is positioned on b8. However, the rook is not guarded by any pieces. So, if we move this knight out of the way, say right here, white can simply capture and put us in check. So we're kind of in a bad spot. We got to keep the knight there to protect the rook, or we got to move the rook out of the way. One of the two, right? Not quite. If you look at this position more closely, now if you remember, if you put the king in check, it limits the king's number of moves. If you'll notice this knight here on e3, if we put him in check, it's protected by the knight on b4. But if you look more closely, we can actually do better than that. Since this knight on e5 is protecting that d3 square, we could take this knight and we could move it to d3. It's protected. The king is in check. Now white's queen is in a bad spot. It can't recapture. I mean, it could recapture, but that's a bad outcome. Or, you know, white could simply do what they did in game, and that is move their king out of the way, which allows us to capture with the rook right there and win the queen, to which white resigns. In this game right here, we are playing as white. We are looking specifically at the b6 pawn. So what we're going to do is we're going to move our rook to b2 there, doubling up, putting pressure on the pawn, to which it only has one defender. The king's going to have to move out of the way, or they're going to lose the pawn. So black has a number of options. Black could take the bishop and defend here. Alternatively, what black decided to do was take the rook and put two defenders on the pawn. We get the b7 king, and of course that d6 rook that got moved right there. Now, if you look at this position more closely, you'll notice there's a huge opportunity here, and I almost missed this one on time. And that is, remember this b pawn right here, the b6 pawn? That pawn, this pawn right here is pinned. It can move forward, but it's pinned to the king. So, huge opportunity here. Now, if you remember earlier in the position, this bishop right here was protecting the c5 pawn. Now, when we go back to this here, since this pawn on b6, I'm just clicking on it so you can see what it is pinned, What that means is it cannot capture anything. So that basically, now that the rook is in front of that c5 pawn, that means we can take this bishop right here and we can capture the c5 pawn and nothing is defending it. And that's what we ended up actually doing here, to which black decided to play rook back. Back one, check. We put the king in check, and we were able to win a decent amount of material in that exchange right there. In this example here, we are playing as white, and it's going to emphasize the importance of checking. Check. The first move is actually black checking us, to which we have a number of options, all three of them, short of blocking, which wouldn't be good. We're going to take option C2 so we can protect this rook on B1. So that's what we take. And black decides to capture. Now, if you'll notice, we have a rook right here that will be taken by the knight. Now, a first reaction a lot of players would have is recapture this right here. And then, or that's one reaction you might have, and that would play out like this. It would be bishop versus knight, right? Okay. You need to analyze the situation a little bit differently here. Notice that as white, we have the bishop on c4. If you also notice that f7 pawn has two attackers, both the bishop and the rook, which means black can't recapture. Now, if we think on another level here, if we check black, black can't capture any of our pieces. All it can do is move the king out of the way. And that means we can recapture the rook on b1. Check. So that's what we do. We check black. Black has a number of options to move out of the way. Black ends up going with g6. And then we're able to take that rook on c or b1 and to get a nice material advantage to be able to finish off the game there. This example right here is an example of how to use combo moves for defense. We're playing as black. White moves its queen into place, and it's basically threatening this pawn right here on d4. We have a queen that's doing pretty much, well, it's defending a lot of pieces, but it's not defending that d4 pawn, which we'd like it to do, because we have this bishop in the way. But we can move this bishop and improve our defense at the same time. Strong combo move here. Where's the best place to put the bishop? If you said a3 check, you are correct. That's what I did. There. So now white has to move its king out of the way. White decides to go with d1. You've got this rook that's not really being used. We like to get it to the open file. That would be e8. It's protected by the queen. So that's what we do. We move it to e8. That is putting pressure on white's queen. White doesn't want to exchange queen for rook because that's a lower valued piece, so white's going to have to move it out of the way. Now, if you also notice, white's king has two escape squares. Once white moves the queen out of the way, it's going to have 0. Okay, next thing we do is we take our queen and we move it forward to d6. White decides that, well, we don't really have, or white doesn't really have any escape squares, and there's a lot of ways we can do some damage, particularly getting the queen into the back row. It would be devastating. So white decides to create some space by pushing the c pawn forward there, looking to exchange, to which white does. After thinking it over, I decide to take the pawn, and then white recaptures with the bishop right there. So white's going to have a ton more space. One little problem with the defense, if you'll notice, this pawn right here is pinned referring to the D3 pawn, and all the queen needs to do is take it right there and put white in check. White defends with the bishop. Now all the queen needs to do is go to, if you said B1, that is correct, check. White defends, and remember the bishop is defending that C1 square, so we simply move the queen there.
Checkmate.
And that's the game. This game right here, we're going to look at the use of a queen and pawn. You can also do it with a rook and pawn. It's way more effective with the queen and pawn because a lot of pieces can't escape. What we're doing is we're trying to set up a pin. So we're taking our queen, and let's just look at the board here real quick. We have this passed pawn right here. Has some value. We have a bishop in place, another bishop, and of course a couple rooks. Black has equal material. We're looking to take our queen and put a pin on Black's king, so that means queen to G3, which you do right there. Okay. Black sees what we're doing and decides to play back. They have a pawn right here. They have a pawn right here that can defend, and they can push this bishop out of the way. That F4 bishop, so that's what they do. Okay, so we have to move our bishop out of the way. Number of options here. I decide the best option is to get rid of the knight, because we get rid of that knight, the knight's going to be more effective in this spot than the bishop because it's a short area. If it was a wide open area, the bishop's more effective. The knight's going to have a lot more moves and a lot more places you can go and defend. So get rid of the knight right there. Okay, we have a pin in place. Now it's Black's turn. Black recaptures. So we have this pin in place. What do? Well, notice there's a pawn on H2. And guess what? The G5 pawn is pinned. So we just push our pawn forward. Okay. Black responds by putting another pawn in place. Now this is a great opportunity to utilize our bishop right here on E2 and put pressure on the rook, because we don't want, Black's got like a bunch of pieces on the left side of the board. We don't want them using it. We want to isolate Black's king and get a mating pattern here. So that's what we're going to do. Put pressure on the rook. Rook decides to take the pawn. Okay, so that was one little problem. Next move is going to be, we have a rook right here. We're going to get that rook in place. So now we can work a combo of pawn, queen, bishop. We've got them all well placed. And Black doesn't have their defense. I mean, it has a queen right here, but there's not a lot of stuff they can do with the queen. It can't use the rook. It could use the bishop. It's not going to help any. So, I mean, it's really down to rook, rook and queen. So Black decides to move its king. Okay. There's a number of options here. I thought about checking and then forcing them out maybe, and then, you know, discover check, or
check. Maybe
they go this way. What I decided to do is just capture with the pawn right there, to which Black captured with its pawn. The reason I did that is I wanted to get the queen involved. If we get the queen to the side, there's a lot of stuff we can do. So my next move here, and then there's another big opportunity here. So let's say we can't finish the checkmate. We could skewer the king and capture the queen. So I decided to take the rook and move it to H7 with the idea of, if Black doesn't move its queen, say out, let's say Black does something like this, we could skewer them. And then they have to move out of the way, and then we would win the queen right there. So that was the idea, to which Black responds by pushing his king back, pretty much nullifying that idea. Okay, fair enough. We'll just protect it right there. So we'll take this and protect it. And what this does is this allows us to move our queen onto the H file, which Black finally decides to move its queen. Number of options it has. It decided to go for d6. Okay. Now we take our queen to h3, and one can pretty much guess what's going to happen here. Even though it brought its rook in, this rook actually hurt. Well, it's not going to hurt at all, really, because we've got all the squares covered. There's a check. They move, and checkmate. That's the game right there. In this final game right here, we are playing as black, and we're going to use a combination, very powerful combination, to get us out of trouble here as we're down material. The first thing we're going to do is shore up the defense, so we're going to move the knight to e7, which threatens white's queen. White decides to take the good option, and that is take e6, check, putting us in check, so we got to move our king out of the way. So we've got our position well defended, but white has more pieces. White just has to figure out a way to get through. So next thing white does is takes its bishop and moves it to g5. That's putting pressure on the knight. We've got two defenders right now, but they're looking to carve out our position here and just totally decimate us. My idea at this point is we got to put the king in check and try to get some combo going here. So I decided to play this pawn forward, c4, and part of the reason I did that was so I could open up a quick check for the queen or possibly the bishop, depending on which. But I think in this spot, moving the queen is better because the queen's kind of boxed in. If it gets to, let's say, b6, it has a lot more range. But I feel like it's better moving the pawn. I guess either case. Anyway, the move I made was pawn forward there, to which white responds by developing its knight. That activates both rooks and gives white a very, very strong position. Also, they're defending the king pretty well. Now, what we do have here for as playing as black is we have a bishop that's eyeing the h2 pawn. Okay. We also have a queen. So we need to shorten down black's moves. What do? We play queen to b6. Check. Check. So that's the actual move we did. Okay. Next thing white does is moves his king out of the way. All right. At this point, I'm hoping to get lucky here. Remember, we can't do anything with the queen. We can't really do anything with bishop and queen. We have one other piece left. That is the rook. And the rook can move to h8, threatening checkmate. If white doesn't see it, we get lucky, and white falls for the knight on e7, not seeing the checkmate, probably because the bishop is hidden. When it shows the queen, it's easier to see. And we get out of that spot and win the game. This game is a great example of combo moves and a player that knows how to dodge them. So black is playing first. What they're looking to do is get rid of the knight that we have on d5. We're playing as white, so it moves to e7. Okay. Looking to exchange there. Knowing that they want to exchange that, I'm thinking of moving the rook to e1. What's the idea? Well, if we go to e1, and let's say black takes, we retake, and we have a discovered check. And that takes away, well, it doesn't totally take away, but it kind of, either this piece is pinned here, or black has to move out of the way. Black's not going to put their queen out there. So black sees this, so black avoids that. So we move our rook into place, and black decides to play pawn forward there because they see the move. Okay, so we got to go to something different. I decided to just push the a pawn forward right there. Black pushes this a pawn from a7 to a6. And then the original idea of pushing the pawn was to a pawn, b pawn, and get rid of that bishop, the bishop that they had right here on c5. So that's the idea. B pawn there, bishop goes back. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to come up with another plan. Decide to go with the knight to the corner which is a terrible spot, but I'm looking to reposition it and possibly trade off again for the bishop there. To which black decides to bring its bishop forward, attacking, of course, that knight that is well positioned there. Okay, fair enough. I decide to go with knight takes. I just give up at that point. Knight takes, queen takes, and then decide to take my other knight and develop it. And again, this is a combo move looking to trap black, because if black goes, takes with bishop, I take here. Now the queen can't go anywhere except to capture or to be captured. So let's say the queen captures here. We win material that way. So that's kind of a trap. And black, being a smart player, knows what I'm doing, backs up. And that's a very, very smart move because it takes away, it also takes away, if you'll notice this pawn right here on G7, that was the alternative play. It was if they moved it out of the way, I could check and take the pawn. So black, being very smart, takes all that away. Okay, got to go to another plan here, and that involves pushing that C pawn forward, to which black decides to play
queenside castling.
Castle to queenside. Okay, so now we have to come up with a different plan of attacking and setting up some combo moves on black's queenside. So I decide to keep it simple and move the rook from A1 to C1. Sorry about the noise there. Okay, black decides to push his pawn forward, a simple move, getting rid of that knight we have in position, to which I, after thinking over for a while, decided to move the knight back. Didn't have any good combo moves there, but we'll see some coming up very shortly, some very good ones, actually. Black pushes the pawn, looking to pawn storm the right side of the board, or my king side. I decided to push the H pawn forward to protect against that. I pushed another pawn forward. Okay, I decide to counter. I decide the best way to do it is with the B pawn. The idea is to get my queen back in on the left side of the board, possibly to A8. So I want to get this queen to, like, say, A4 and then A8. That's the idea behind the pawn push right there. Black decides to take the pawn, to which I decide to take the pawn again. Okay, so now we have a protected pawn on B5 that just captured, and we have a lot of other stuff going for us. Black decides to move its bishop forward, even better yet. So now it's time to get that queen involved, but not quite yet. I want to make sure I have this whole position secure, so I'm going to get a knight involved, because you can't just check him with the queen. So I get the knight involved here, to which black takes. Now I can capture with the pawn, and that opens up the spot for the E1 rook. Okay, so black decides to push its other pawn forward. Right there, that takes away one of the options potentially we had, and that was we could go, let's see, back here. One of the potential options was this bishop here going to F5 check, which isn't in the cards now, because the queen, black's queen, protects it on F8. So the big idea was to get this queen involved here. So we're going to go to A4, okay, to which black responds by securing its bishop. And then, of course, queen to A8 check. And here's where it gets really interesting and the combos get set up here. So, obviously, black moves its king out of the way. Number of options for the queen. The best one here is to take B7, I believe. So we take it there. Now the queen is potentially protected by two pawns. Black decides to use, they got two rooks and a queen. They decide to use one of the rooks to protect. To which we play queen to C6, check.
Check.
Right there. Okay, black moves out of the way, and now the fun begins. We need to clear out the position, so one of the first things they do is secure the pawn structure. So I move the 8th pawn forward there. Black decides to push its pawn. I decide not to take that exchange there, and instead use a rook left to get the rook to this rook right here to e6. Okay, and it's going to get even more fun. Black decides to take right there. I decide to not take. I don't take the exchange. I just push the pawn forward. Right there, trying to keep the position somewhat secure. I just need to basically buy time here to be able to attack Black's position. So that's what I'm trying to do. Black pushes again. I decide to play the rook. That's right, the C rook right here to e1, doubling up rooks. And we're looking to threaten that e8 square. Okay? Black decides to move its queen forward. Even better yet. Even better yet. Because now, well, it wants to protect its queen against the square, that e8 square. Here's a really good move here. And if you said with something with the bishop, you are correct. I decided to move the bishop to g7, threatening the queen. But more importantly, it threatens the e8 square. And there's not a lot of good choices here. If Black takes, we take here, and we're in a good spot. Okay? If, let's say if we went here and Black takes here, that's obviously a bad spot too. So what did Black decide to do? Well, Black's a smarter player. Black decides to go queen to d7, offering the exchange here. Now, fortunately for us, we have two attackers, being these two rooks right here, and one defender, and potentially another defender in the queen, if we can move this dislodged queen. So our next play right here is a huge combo that wins the game. It's rook to e8 check. Black plays rook takes. We have the e1 rook that is. We take it there, check. And there's nowhere for the king to go, so Black has to capture with the queen, and there it is.
Checkmate.
Checkmate right there. In this example right here, we're playing as white, and we're trying to set up a combo move. First thing we're going to do is interlock the knights. I'm going to play knight to c6. Black decides to take its knight and capture the d3 pawn, which puts pressure on this rook right here. I decide to give up the rook and go for a combo move. I decide to play the queen to a4, setting up a discovered check potentially. Black decides in this scenario to take the knight on e5 and threaten the knight on c6 because they see that there's a discovered check potentially. Okay. Now we're in good shape. We have our queen right here. All we need to do is move this knight. And there's a number of options for it. I think the best option is knight takes e5 because it's a freebie. So that's what I ended up doing right there. Discovered check. Black decides, well, it has a number of options. It could block with a queen, which isn't very good in any of these three scenarios. Let's say they go queen to d7, or better yet,
check.
So that's a bad option there. I think the other options for the queen, are not good as well. So Black decides to take one of the options with the king. It decides to go to e7. That's what they actually played. To which there's a really good setup here. There's a check fork. I don't know if you can see it here with the knight. Knight to g6. Check fork and wins the rook.
Check.
King moves out of the way.
Check.
There's a check right there, and at that point, Black resigns. In this game right here, we're going to take a look at two combos that we're used to win a decent amount of material here. First move we're going to do as white, we have the option to castle. We are going to castle to the left side. The idea is to put pressure on Black's bishop. So we go ahead and we
Queenside castling.
to the queen side. It's black to move. Black decides to solidify its pawn structure
Queenside castling.
by pushing the f7 pawn to f6. Okay, so it's our move here. Now we're basically going to offer an exchange, but it's not an obvious exchange. And then this is going to eventually win a bunch of material and set up a combo move. We're going to take our bishop, and we're going to sacrifice it to, or we're going to take the pawn on g5. Now what that's going to do is it's going to open up the spot for this d1 rook that's not doing anything. So it could go something like this. If black takes, that's the exchange right there. Okay? The way it actually played out was we took right here, black decided to recapture the pawn on f2. Well, great. Now we can just take this bishop and put it in position. And we got two attackers now, be it the rook and then now the bishop, and we can put the king in check. Black decides to block.
Check.
There's a check there. Don't want to exchange right away. We want to develop this h1 rook. Okay, we trade off rooks. Well, we don't trade off rooks here. We're going to capture with the bishop because there's a lot of stuff we can do. Okay. Black's threatening there. We go ahead and activate our knight here, get our knight into position. The idea is to go to the a7 square and check, and there's going to be a pretty cool combo coming up here. Okay, black decides to block.
Check.
Here's the check. Now if you'll notice, black's king only has two options to get out of there, as all the other squares on the inside are covered. Particularly by the bishop we have on d6. Okay, so black decides to go right there. And here's the cool combo. There's a really cool combo that can win material here. Now remember, we have this rook on d1. Okay, we also have a bishop. As soon as we move the bishop out of the way, there's a discovered check. How do we win material? Well, if you said bishop to g3, you are correct.
Check.
Discovered check. Black moves. We win the bishop. And of course that is going to wrap this up. If you're looking for more chess tips and strategies, be sure to check out the link in the description below for a playlist. There's 3 different ones on this channel, or you can just check out the playlist on this channel. But yeah, the first one we're looking at is Chess for Beginners. There's a lot of different problems, such as different tactics and strategies, forks, skewers, pins, deflection, all kinds of stuff like that. There's also this game for the PS4 that has its own separate playlist. It's called Pure Chess. You don't have to have a game to look at the problems. There's basically 99 problems in there, anywhere from mate in 1 to mate in 5. I learned a ton by doing these problems, so I think it's very, very helpful. Something definitely worth checking out. Even if you don't have the game, it's definitely worth checking out. And of course, last but not least, there is a third playlist. It's called Chess versus Master AI. Basically, it involves any chess engine that I beat that was on the hardest level when it was made. Did it with a number of different chess apps, as well as the Pure Chess game for the PS4, and I think Majestic Chess. But yeah, there's a lot of different opponents there, and we look at strategies as to how to beat those opponents, which some of them are really, really tough. So you can learn a lot with that too. And of course, that is going to wrap this up. I am signing out. Thanks for watching, and good luck.